Yep.
Got it?
Yep.
Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. And we are joined by two guests, Nefta Freeman and Amanuel Biedemariam. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And apologies if I am butchering your name.
Biedemariam.
Biedemariam. All right.
Right. And my name has the T first. Netfa. A lot of people
yes.
make that other mistake, but
apologies for that.
yeah, no problem. Everybody does it. I don't know why. It's like I find out that the only people who don't do it are little children under the age of 9. It's true. I don't know why they get it.
That means there is hope for this for this planet, that that the younger generation will save us from oblivion. Then
good spin. Really
right.
So we are joined. Yes. So we are joined by Netfa Freeman and Amanuel Biedemariam, two members of the Black Alliance for Peace, which is.
Well, Amanuel is not a member of the Black Alliance for Peace. At least not that I know. He might have joined since, but I'm the Black Alliance for Peace. And Amanuel, I guess you might want to say your affiliation.
Amanuel Biedemariam, I'm a member of the Eritrean community in the Washington D.C. area, the DMV area.
And you want to? Can he say his name of his book? Because I think that's important.
Yes, please do.
The author also the history of the USA and Eritrea, chronicling the history of the USA and Eritrea starting the 1940s after World War II, and it just goes into detail about the history of Eritrea and the United States, so the United States and Eritrea.
Perfect, and that's one of the subjects that we're going to be speaking about a lot. So on this edition of 1+1, we are going to talk about sort of the history of Ethiopia from the reign of Haile Selassie to Cold War politics to current upheavals that are taking place in Ethiopia. Because last December there was quite a humongous armed conflict that was going on between them and the region known as Tigray, which I'm looking forward to you enlightening us about. And before we get into that conversation, Black Alliance for Peace is an anti-war, anti-imperialist group involved in many campaigns, often overlooked by the anti-war movement, which is getting Africom out of Africa, ending the ongoing militarization of the African region by the U.S., the Anglo-American Empire, NATO, and so forth, trying to get them out of Africa, and so that Africa can work on its self-determination without neo-colonialism going on. So first of all, gentlemen, thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
In order to have you both, so the first question I would like to ask, and either gentleman can jump in or just take turns with either of the questions. So the first question I'd like to ask is, what was life like for Ethiopians under the late Emperor Haile Selassie? What were the positives that he achieved for his people, and what were the negatives of his rule towards the end of his reign?
That's you, Amanuel.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's a very broad question, but I think the legacy of Haile Selassie is very interesting. It's just it's a very, very broad question, but I'll try to kind of give you a picture of what his background is a little bit. Right before World War II, the Italians targeted Ethiopia, and when they attacked Ethiopia, he fled to the west, to France, and he stayed in exile until the Allied forces defeated Italy in 1941 and kicked Italy out of Ethiopia. After that, they brought him in to Ethiopia. He was the de facto leader from exile. When he came back in 1941, they kind of merged Ethiopia into one entity, and they supported him. They gave him all the support. And they gave him the international notoriety, got him involved in the Korean War, to lift the stature of Ethiopia up, ensure that. Go ahead.
I was saying, wow, I did not know that he was actually involved in the Korean War. That's interesting.
Yes, they got him involved in the Korean War. They wanted the United States wanted to get into Africa, and they also wanted an angle into Africa. And one of the things, Ethiopia wanted arms to replenish its armaments after its defeat, but after the war in 1941. Mm-hmm. They wanted to replenish their arms, so the United States made a condition to provide arms, but they also did not want to give arms to African country without any kind of a precondition attached to it. So I think one of the conditions that they attached was for Ethiopia to send peacekeeping or troops to Korea, to North Korea, in support of the West. At that time the United Nations did not support the United Nations get involved. So the United States gathered its allies, and Ethiopia was one of them. That's how Ethiopia took a center stage into all the peacekeeping activities afterwards. Anyway, that was how they built the statue of Haile Selassie, and it was a monarchy. It was a feudal system that few in his circle controlled vast amount of land, and there was relative peace. When Haile Selassie was in power, Ethiopia was one of the strongest armies because the United States ensured to train 45,000 troops and just modernize the Ethiopian army because they had a base in Eritrea. So because of the feudal system, there was disparity in the country. There was the poor and the rich, and so there was some relative stability, growth in Ethiopia, especially in the main cities. But there's also a huge gap in terms of income inequality and hardship in the villages and all over the country, and that's one of the things that kind of led to the uprising, the proletariat movement of the Soviet-backed Mengistu Biedemariam that came to power in 1974, because there were all kinds of issues in terms of drought and things like that in Ethiopia. So that's kind of in a nutshell what it was. Haile Selassie had a pretty good acceptance by the international community. He was, just looked at as a very, very important figure in Africa. And that's his legacy. He was an incredible diplomat, but there was a lot of issues in his country, and eventually that ended up leading to his, ouster. So, in a nutshell, I think that's probably the best way I could describe it.
Right, and then I don't know how much I can even add to anything as far as Amanuel's knowledge of this, and this is not my area in terms of the particulars, but maybe Amanuel, you might be able to say more, but also some of us might know and remember that Haile Selassie was romanticized in the Caribbean and is raised to the level of a prophet and kind of the undergirded, I guess what you call, the Rastafarianism, and so it was romanticized, and all these other things that Amanuel just talked about weren't really known. And so, in fact, I didn't even know a lot of what he just said, so it's new to me.
Yeah, exactly, and it's I
think a lot of the romanticism comes because Ethiopia is seen as not having been colonized and standing up against, which it did. People fought valiantly against colonialism, but then the interpretation of and the ins and outs of all of that, I think, may have been misconceived.
And
but
that's,
I don't know.
yeah, and that's a perfect segue then to this second question of mine, which is, can you talk about the Derg led by Mengistu, and yeah, and what was their reign like in Ethiopia, the positives and the positive and the negatives of when they took power when they took power in the coup.
I was I was a young kid at that time, just trying to get into high school, 1974, 75. When they came to power, like I was saying earlier, the movement, the proletariat movement, is kind of what led to the military taking over, and also the Soviet Union had eyed Ethiopia as a target, and so they were doing all kinds of work to get in to Ethiopia, to make sure that Ethiopia became a part of the sphere of influence of the Soviet Union at that time. And so you have a nation that is biblical, religious. You have a nation that had disparity in terms of income disparity, agricultural land being held by a few. And when Derg came, they basically undid that. They made sure that merit larashu, meaning land to the tiller, and empowered the public, and religion, those kinds of beliefs. The capitalism was done away with. So you have this collective approach to governance, not governance, but to running the country, sharing the country. But Mengistu Haile Mariam was brutal. In order to achieve that, he was killing. And also, the situation in Eritrea was getting out of hand for him. And with the help of the Soviet Union, Cuba, Yemen, they were heavily engaged in the war against Eritrea. And that led to his undoing eventually, because the billions and billions that they were spending to fight in Eritrea was not sustainable. And eventually, as the Soviet Union started to slow down economically and everything, and as it started to fail, then the backing of the Soviet Union dwindled, and the Mengistu Haile Mariam started to get weaker and weaker as the Eritrean independence movement got stronger. He got weaker, and eventually led to his undoing. So that's what it is. But it was a brutal, bloody dictatorship, kind of like what you saw in the South Central American countries during the 80s. Bloody, all kinds of things, a lot of killing, a lot of youth death, and hundreds of thousands killed in the streets of Addis Ababa and Eritrea, everywhere. So it was that bloody.
Wow. And why do you and so all that being said, what do you think caused this conflict between Eritrea? So was Eritrea a part of Ethiopia that wanted to break away after the reign of Haile Selassie, and where does the Cold War politics play into this? Because you mentioned that the Soviet Union backed Mengistu. So where was the United States and its allies in this?
Go ahead.
You want me to? Well, still, I would defer to. So let me, whatever Emmanuel can clear up anything I get wrong. And I think we might have to go back some, because there was a section of Ethiopia that was able to be colonized by Italy. And I'm not, the years go back pretty far. We're talking about the 1800s, or then later in the 1900s, and then after when this is what became Eritrea. So after Eritrea won and fought this independence battle, just like the other African countries on the continent, and got its independence, then the United States and I think Britain annexed Eritrea and gives it to Ethiopia. Sort of makes it a protected or under the jurisdiction of Ethiopia, not with the consultation of the Eritrean people. So there's that. That's basically at the root of that. And then the fact that, and we're still talking about Haile Selassie, or was that, yeah, and that and I guess we have to because Ethiopia was not formally colonized, except for that one section, and also participated. Actually, I think it's relevant. The formation of the Organization of African Unity in 1963 took place in Addis Ababa and was hosted. And Haile Selassie was also seen. This was a part of the I said glorification of Haile Selassie, and so a lot of what the perception, and I think this might be a little tangential to your question about the involvement of Soviet Union and U.S., but I think it's relevant. There was also this notion that an independent Eritrea was contrary to a united Africa and a liberated Africa, but that's confusion, clearly. If we're talking about trying to undo the Berlin Conference and all those kind of things, and the slicing up of Africa. So fast forward, at the root of that conflict is not just the Soviet Union or anything. It was the fact that Eritrea had established its own national unity, had to fight its own liberation struggle, and deserved, and also would have been being a part of a repressive system, like we just heard about the nature of Ethiopia under Mengistu and under Haile Selassie. And in fact, during Eritrea's, in fact, now I'm really talking out of my area. This is your area, but I would like to say that, and you can. This is where you can actually clean any mess that I made. Is that the the organization, the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, and all that had significant in terms of its organization with dealing with its people outside in the diaspora around the world, and had such a strong the methods of organizing and the methods of waging the liberation struggle outside of armed struggle created a unity that really was unprecedented, is very unique and commendable, that would be undone if it had to become part of some other some other country that wasn't really caring for its people. But anyway, I think, Amanuel, you should probably step in there.
You're spot on. What I would like to add is, prior to 1941, prior to the World War II, the United States had no presence in Africa, and after World War II, they wanted to get Italy out and position the United States in Africa by having a presence in Eritrea and Ethiopia. And that's how the United States injected itself in that region. And so they wanted to have a base in Eritrea. They also wanted to have a presence in Africa, and the Ethiopia and Eritrea served that purpose. So the idea of federation that the United States and Great Britain came up with was to make sure that Eritrea become a part of Ethiopia, denied the people of Eritrean rights to self-determination, and created a system by which, after a certain amount of time, when the Eritreans are pacified and the global community, the international community, accepted the idea of Eritrea as part of Ethiopia, then the annexation of Eritrea took place, which led to the liberation of the Eritrean independence in 1961. So that is how it came about. The United States wanted to have a presence. They wanted to control Africa. They wanted to make sure that the Soviet Union did not have serious presence in Africa. So they also wanted to counter the independence movements in Africa. They wanted to slow down so that in order to control the resources and the geopolitics of countries or regions of that area. So that was what was taking place at that time.
So so the United States already by then was sort of already trying to do the old divide and conquer routine to drive a wedge between between this region of an African country or this part of Africa, and sort of pit one against the other because it's in the imperialists' interest to keep Africa and region bitterly divided, right?
I mean, I would say so, but one thing that I think we have to that's commendable about Eritrea, and it's exemplary, is that even their position was never to be aligned with the United States or the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And so we saw a real non-aligned movement, which I don't know the answers of where Eritrea was, whether it was still waging its the war against Ethiopia when the non-aligned movement was established, in the 60s and the late 50s and 60s. And so, but their position was also, I just said that to just be careful that it wasn't that Eritrea took a side with the United States and then the Soviet Union, even though the Ethiopia's and Mengistu's alignment with the Soviet Union helped foster, because we're talking about the Cold War here, so it helped, kind of legitimize the divisions and the tensions between countries.
I think also one of the MOs that the United States or the Western powers use is to have a leadership that they support, they put them in power, and empower them to do basically anything they want, and that is. And gross human rights violations were okay. Like when Haile Selassie was in power, they were doing all kinds of killings in Eritrea. That was glossed over. With hunger, starvation in Ethiopia, that was glossed over. Eventually, it ended up doing him all the harm he's undoing. And they also. Give them all the tools, like you mentioned, the division in Eritrea. They want to make sure that the countries are divided by ethnicity, religion, by the minutest amount of divisions that they could be divided, and so there's no stability, there's no peace, and they also target institutions. They want to make sure that the institutions don't exist. So educational institutions, banking, technology, anything, any institution that could really empower a nation is targeted. And so there is always a sense of instability in the nations that they present themselves in.
And that's a perfect segue to this question. And either of you can answer this question, which is can you demystify what took place in the 80s with the whole Live Aid performance in the United States and Britain, and what did it achieve, if anything, for Ethiopian relief against the famine, which, as you mentioned, bitterly plagued Ethiopia and caused Selassie's reign to end? And what were the falsehoods behind the supposedly Western do-goodism that helped out Ethiopia?
Well, I think you're better to, maybe if you know anything. I just know that United States, we're talking about the time when the United States was really trying to tighten its influence and its grip in terms of neo-colonialism on the continent of Africa. It wasn't able to get in on the early stages of colonialism that France and Europe and all of Europe were, but to posit itself as some force that is to bring good and alleviate famine and all that kind of stuff is just ridiculous. And it was only probably because of Mengistu being They could say it was Marxist or something like that. I mean, I can't even, it's probably, but I'm not, it's a good question. I remember the Live Aid thing, but I don't know details, and I never did any research around that, but that's a good question. So maybe Amanuel has.
Just to elaborate on that, 1975, the United States was basically kicked out, not in the way that the United States was kicked out of Vietnam, but in a similar fashion. They were just, forced to get out of Eritrea and Ethiopia in a hurry after the Soviet Union backed Mengistu Haile Mariam took power. And they were, after that, trying to get back into Ethiopia. Eritrea was a part of Ethiopia at that time. So they didn't have any access. They didn't have any in because they didn't have any kind of political leverage. They were supporting Haile Selassie fully. And when they were ousted, when he was ousted, the United States did not have a footing in Africa and Ethiopia. So during the time when the famine was coming, the United States was interested into the rebellion that was taking place in Ethiopia. And one of the developments that was taking place in Ethiopia at that time was they did not want Eritrean independence, but they wanted any kind of movement in Ethiopia. And the Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF, was just beginning. At that time, Eritrea supported them, started supporting them in 1975, 76 to 77. And then when the United States started having presence, the CIA started getting involved in the 80s, in the early 80s. Gail Smith and others, just got in and started supporting the Tigray People's Liberation Front, which with the aid of Eritrea at the end ended up coming to power in Ethiopia. And so the connection of the United States with the TPLF goes back in the 80s. In the 80s, when the famine was taking place, a lot of the money that was being raised, that was going through the northern part of Ethiopia at that time, was being funneled through the TPLF, Tigray People's Liberation Front. And there are records now how the funds were being misused. So, the do-gooder aspect of the West was really a way not only to help, but to inject themselves in what was going on in Ethiopia, politically, militarily, and otherwise. So that is kind of like the complexity or the context under which you can talk about that situation. So famine was a chance, an opportunity to get involved in Ethiopia as far as the United States and Western involvement, is, including Israel, is concerned. So you can look at it in that context.
So did the United States and its allies allow? Could they have helped in the relief much quicker when the famine broke out in Ethiopia? Could they have helped? But they sort of allowed the situation to deteriorate and get worse as a way to, restructure how they wanted to deal with Ethiopia in terms of, neo-colonialism, imperialism, and whatnot.
Go ahead, Emmanuel. I don't know the answer to that.
I think you can absolve the United States from the drought and the mismanagement of the country to an extent. Even though the United States is partly responsible because of its presence and the support of the Ethiopian regime at that time, Haile Selassie, they were not present, but they were trying to get in. So that's how I could explain that part of it.
Okay. And I think that sort of leads me to this question, which was, so Ethiopia was placed in the Cold War. So Ethiopia, during the Cold War, when the Derg came into power, was more closely aligned with the Soviet Union. And you talked a bit about their human rights abuses. And is it safe to say that when they ruled, were they very much like Pol Pot's reign in Cambodia in terms of human rights abuses and backwardness, or was it sort of a mixed bag in which they did very much some much needed reforms, but at the expense of a lot of people's human rights abuses?
The human rights abuses were intense in Ethiopia. They were just, killings. Kids were just taken out of their homes and killed in front of their parents. Entire families were getting killed. The degree, the villages were burned, women's breasts cut off. So there was brutality under Haile Selassie and under Derg. You cannot compare it to anything. You just have to look at it on its own, because that's probably a better way. It's the experience of the Ethiopian and Eritrean people, especially during the Derg, were similar in that they were just wanton killings, imprisonment, just all kinds of torture that was taking place. I mean, I grew up in that era, and we were living in fear on a daily basis. You could not go to school. You could not go certain streets in the city, and every day, you hear killings. They go to bars that they suspect some people that they don't like, and they just kill the entire group or party that was in the bar at that time. So all kinds of killings were taking place, and if you live through that kind of stuff, it really leaves an impression on you. We grew up getting out of the house and seeing dead people on the streets, with graphic, pictures. You just get up. 8 o'clock in the morning, you wander around, and you have people laying around dead, and so it's really disheartening to grow up, and just all kinds of gunfires on top of you. So it's brutal. It's hard to describe. It's hard to compare to anything other than explain the experience of what it is like to live under that kind of condition.
And you mentioned that Haile Selassie, during his time, he also was quite brutal to certain ethnic groups. So did the Derg, more or less continue on with that, which leads to, the Eritrean War of Independence and the current conflict that we saw last December with the Tigray people?
Netfa, you want to go ahead?
I mean, I think you still, you could answer all these questions without me. You're probably
the Tigray question, the TPLF question is different. When the Italians, it goes back to the colonial legacy of Africa.
Yeah.
1941, when the Italians were defeated, and Haile Selassie was coming to power, there was a power vacuum in areas in Ethiopia, and Tigray was one of them. And so there was a movement in Tigray in 1943 to, as part of Ethiopia, they called it Wayane. They did an uprising, and Haile Selassie, in relation with the United Kingdom, Great Britain, bombed the rebellion and quelled it and controlled the entire country, including Tigray, including Eritrea. So, and brought in a very repressive administration into Tigray in 1943. And from that on, there was resentment in the country, and that led eventually to the 1975 TPLF movement started at that time. And so the repression is what led to that, but it was just a part of the Ethiopian governance structure. For Eritrea, it was totally different. It had its colonial legacy. The movement has started in 1961, and Eritrea needed allies, and it was supporting the TPLF, Tigray People's Liberation Front. And one of the brilliance of the Eritrean liberation movement, the liberation struggle, is that from the early point of the struggle, the Eritreans understood that in order to be able to have success in Ethiopia, you have to have partnership with the movements in Ethiopia, and was able to forge relationship with the Oromos, Tigray, and a lot of the other movements that were taking place. And so that is kind of what gave leverage to the TPLF, Tigray People's Liberation Front. Eritrea's established position already kind of gave rise to the TPLF, and trained them, armed them, helped them in any way possible to ensure that they are part of the fight against the Derg. And so that is how the TPLF came. But the TPLF had its own agenda. They wanted to carve out a nation of their own at the expense of Eritrea and Ethiopia. They took areas from parts of Ethiopia that during Haile Selassie, there were 4 administrative regions. They call them, kind of like the states, 14 states, administrative regions. And Tigray was one of the regions. And there were a couple of Wallo and Biedemariam. They took land from those states and took land from Eritrea, the Badme War, which I'm sure Netfa would remembers. They wanted to get access to the sea through Afar and other places. So they had an expansion mentality that they wanted to employ in order to be able to have access to the sea, destabilize Eritrea and Ethiopia. But they did it while they were running Ethiopia. They came to power to Ethiopia in 1991, and they were using that power to leverage the economy, the economic opportunity that Ethiopia provides, the diplomatic presence of Africa and the world in Ethiopia, and, all the leverages that you can think of that Ethiopia provide, the aid, they transferred all that to the Tigray region. So they were basically using Ethiopia to establish the state of Tigray. And so that is kind of what led to the current developments that took place in November of last year, which led to the law enforcement operation, is what the Ethiopian government calls it, campaign, and that's where we are. That's kind of like the context of how the conflict arises.
Right. I guess you could, and then maybe I'm sorry, I don't mean to go into interview mode because I got my I have a radio show too. But maybe the part of what you in there, Amanuel, maybe when Abiy came to and that whole shift of from the Tigray and what's his the president before he just passed before in Ethiopia before Abiy.
Haile
Yeah. And so, maybe that you skipped over the part of the fact that Tigray's not in power in Ethiopia anymore, and them trying to continue with this agenda. And then actually, and also I think it's also important to note that during this time, so Ethiopia and Tigray came to power in Ethiopia at the same time Eritrea got independence in 1991. This is what they piggybacked off of. And that at some point, and Eritrea, establishing its own country, self-determination, doing its thing, became a target, got in the crosshairs of the West, and they leveled sanctions against them and accused them, the whole propaganda thing of human rights violations and all that kind of stuff. And then eventually, we're talking about a couple of years ago, 2017? Was it 2017? That they were able to thwart all of the propaganda, and then and do their own negotiations and have the United Nations and lift the sanctions.
Yeah.
Still being self-determination. In fact, Eritrea is the only country that we can identify right now that does not have a military to military, some form of Africom in the country and on the continent. And so out of 53 countries, out of 54 countries, Eritrea is the one that doesn't have it. And so anyway, they negotiated them to be able to lift these sanctions. And then Abiy also came into power then around the same time, and they brokered a peace between the Eritrea and Ethiopia that hadn't been seen. But then now we're where Amanuel was just talking about, where we see. You want to do something?
One second. There seems to be an echo on the call, and I'm going to see if there's anything I can do about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were going good for a minute there.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. I don't hear it anymore. Do you?
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead. Okay. Go ahead. Sorry about that.
So,
can I change the phone?
Yes,
maybe it's the my.
Oh no, it's okay. It's
to change something. We're fine now. I think I can't hear it anymore. But I forgot what. So now we're in this position where everything we're hearing in the news about Tigray and Ethiopia coming down against it, and the disbelief or the not trusting that Eritrea and Ethiopia are collaborating against Tigray region, because that's what they're saying that we're not, and they're doing their own operating in their own interests around their own issues. But then the world is saying, well, they're both collaborating and whatnot. I think it's important to note that while the Trump administrations was taking this sort of so-called hands-off Africa kind of thing, or not really dealing with Africa, it wasn't high on the priority list. Now that the Biden administration is in, you have them talking about the United States is back at the table, and we want to prioritize Africa. You have Gregory Meeks, I think his name is. It's a congressperson who's now elected to the House on Foreign Affairs, is talking about we gotta get back in Africa. And some of the issue areas, one of the issue areas is this issue of what's happening in Ethiopia and Eritrea and that region. Yeah. And that their position is anti the self-determination of the people, anti-negotiate. We gotta use our bully pulpit to this is U.S. imperialism. So if it doesn't tell us anything, Malcolm X should tell us when the United States is, whatever side the United States is on, we probably need to be on the other side. Not probably. It's just and so right now we're hearing a lot of the propaganda, but we have to be careful of what we're being told.
Okay, sorry about that. We just lost Amanuel, but
I'm back.
Perfect.
Yeah. I don't know if you heard that last part that I said, Amanuel, that you might want to step in there. I said, because with the United States taking sides in this issue, and
absolutely. I mean, the current situation is different than what it has its roots, of course. The presence of the United States in Ethiopia, and after the Cold War in 1991, things changed.
Because by then the Derg had fell, right? They were overthrown.
Exactly, the Derg fell, the Soviet Union fell, and the United States had a prominent role in Africa. And at that time, the United States kind of devised a way in Africa. They created a system that they call, they place anchor states: Nigeria, South Africa, Ethiopia, and Algeria in various parts. And then they injected within the process the RECs, the regional economic communities, that they wanted to control Africa through. But what happened after 2000, especially after 2000, after the Clinton administration signed the U.S.-China Act, basically gave China a free reign to do a lot of things around the world. And Africa was the primary focus of China, and established bilateral relations with many African countries, basically undoing American structure. So this was going on, and up until the Trump administration took power. When the Trump administration took power, they wanted to do away with what the United States was doing in Africa. Started developing bilateral relations with different African countries, and that's one of the reasons why the sanctions, of course, the resilience of the Eritrean people, and had they not lifted the sanctions, Ethiopia was the situation it was under. Eventually, what would have happened is Ethiopia would have disintegrated, and because for 21, 22 years, Eritrea and Ethiopia were at odds with each other, and the Ethiopian economy, the people of Ethiopia have had enough of what was going on with the TPLF leadership that really exploited the country at the expense of Ethiopia. And then when they rised up, they got rid of the TPLF. Now the presence of the United States in Ethiopia is a lot less than what it used to be. The Chinese have really put themselves in a very, very good position. And so a lot of what you see right now, the points that Mr. Netfa raised earlier, trying to inject themselves using human rights and all kinds of things, is they don't want to destabilize Ethiopia, but they wanted to control Ethiopia. They wanted to still have a presence. They don't like what they're seeing as far as the BRI, the Belt Road Initiative that China is doing throughout the world. And Eritrea, Ethiopia, if they are intact, they are strong, they have good bilateral relations, and the Europeans would be out of place, and they don't want that to happen at this point. Right. So they're trying to inject themselves in any way that they can under the way they do it is they do humanitarian intervention that they did in Libya. So they create a hysteria, they create a calamity. There's this going on in this country. There's a massacre taking place, genocide taking place. So they create this urgency so they can say, we need access, we need presence to protect these people. And that's how they do it. And this is what they're trying to achieve at this point. This is what you see, all the hysteria that you're seeing in Tigray. They're using the supporters of the TPLF that wanted independence to really amplify the volume of hardship. There was a priest. There was somebody who impersonated a priest who lives in Boston as an interpreter, works as an interpreter in Boston, and he dressed up as a priest, and he was talking about a massacre that took place in Axel, and recorded himself. And Amnesty International actually used that, used it to make a case that atrocities actually took place in Axel. So that is the kind of stuff, the theater that's taking place at this point.
Theater.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Then my second to last question, and maybe we have to do another show about the Somalia connection to all of this. So, wow. So where does Ethiopia's relationship with Somalia and the whole Cold War and post Cold War world leave us with it? And if that's probably too much of a broad question, better for another episode, feel free to let me know.
Well, I'm always willing to defer to you, Amanuel. You know more details better than me, but I know that Ethiopia was used to invade Somalia. And so now the government that you have in Somalia now is a product of that destabilization that's favorable to the United States and brings in and has itself posits itself as needing the United States to fight Al-Shabaab and bringing in the drones and all these drone strikes that are killing people on the ground there. And Ethiopia was before the government now was instrumental. I don't want to say instrumental. I guess you could say instrumental, but because the United States really is so shameless, it actually participated directly in this, and we, as we know, also invaded Somalia in the 1990s. And so there's the Horn of Africa, when it comes to Western and interference, it's everywhere. It's kind of complicated, but I think right now we're seeing a very unstable Somalia that is also the most where the most intensified U.S. drone war on the continent of Africa is taking place, and they don't disclose how many people they kill, and they make it seem like it's all for altruistic purposes. This war on terror and Al-Shabaab, who that we know as an organization, and a lot of these organizations on the continent of Africa are a direct result of United States policies and militarism on the continent, decimating the Libya, and that the Al-Shabaab, these extremist groups basically are reactions to foreign domination. Al-Shabaab's mission basically is because of the United States is in there, and they're reactionary, but so they're not revolutionary groups that have that are trying to establish some self-determination and all that kind of stuff. But the point is, their existence is a direct result of U.S. and NATO interference in the continent of Africa. So anyway, that was my piece on that.
Oh, thank you for that. Anything you want to add to that, Amanuel, or?
There's a geopolitical tussle that is going on in that region. That includes Somalia. There's an area in Somalia called Puntland, Somaliland, that wants to assert its independence. And you have competition of global powers that want to come into the area. Somalia is extremely rich. You also have Kenya that has a stake in what's going on in Somalia. So Somalia has been under assault, and the TPLF, especially the Meles Zenawi, being the right hand tool, the troop, the boots on the ground that the United States use to interfere in Somalia, kind of really killed Somalis' ability to do anything. Generation after generation of Somalis were basically decimated. No educational capabilities, healthcare, all the institutions were done. There is, however, a little bit of hope at the horizon. Now you have the Ethiopian government that does not see the Somalia as enmity. Actually, they want to end that enmity. You have Eritrea that's always been pro-Somalia, that is trying to resuscitate Somalia in a way, bring it back as a sovereign nation. So there's work in that going on. So there's a possibility that something positive can come out of that. Otherwise, the entire Horn of Africa region, how it was going for the last 50, 60 years, could have disintegrated, especially if Eritrea were not as strong as it is. If you take Eritrean equation out of Ethiopia at this point, the TPLF would have basically dismantled Ethiopia. That would have been the case, and that's where we are. You can see Somalia within the integration idea of Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Somalia, and hopefully that works and the region starts gaining strength. And that's one of the things that the Europeans and the Western, the United States, are fighting against. So this is what we're looking at right now.
Mm-hmm.
That leads to this perfect last question then is now Netfa, what is your organization, the Black Alliance for Peace, campaigning when it comes to U.S. The U.S.'s reactionary role in Ethiopia and its neighboring countries, the Horn of Africa? What is your organization campaigning? And then you can explain, more broadly, the whole mission of the Black Alliance for Peace with Africom out of Africa and U.S. and NATO out of Africa.
Well, that's what we're campaigning for. So it's the whole of Africa. It's not just the Horn of Africa, but definitely includes the Horn of Africa. That the United States has no altruistic purpose, and in fact, the Africom is part of the over 800 military bases that it has around the world, and these different militarized command centers. That we are opposed to militarism, particularly U.S. and NATO militarism, what we refer to as the U.S., EU, NATO axis of domination. This is their response to their inability to stand up to the other economic world power, China, and instead of, they can't match it with their commitment to neoliberalism, global neoliberalism, and capitalism. They have a far inferior challenge, and so that's what allows these countries to gain a stranglehold. So what they do is to resort to full spectrum dominance, in their words. So we're calling for the complete and unequivocal withdrawal of Africom and all U.S. Military forces on the continent of Africa, completely withdraw, unconditionally withdraw. And then we also, in addition to that, part and parcel of that is closing all of the military bases that the United States has around the world. All this propaganda that it needs it and that they're serving interest. I mean, we just saw them bomb Syria with some convoluted rationale that they're retaliating against Iran, but for something that was done in Iraq, and that, so they bombed Syria. This is ridiculous. And so, it's not about any and we hear some of the liberal forces are talking about there's no military solution. Well, they're not talking about solutions to what? The only solution to colonialism and neo-colonialism is to get out, to end it, but that solution thing seems to embrace some unspoken or what do you call it, insinuating or implicated benevolence, that they're trying to solve something and they're not doing it the right way. Well, the only thing they're trying to do is have dominance over the resources and the labor and the markets of the world, and particularly Africa. So we're calling for the end of that, where we go to the policymakers, the Congressional Black Caucus and whoever, and demand that there be not only the withdrawal, but a full investigation of the impact of Africom on the African continent, to disclose this, and in terms of casualties, everything. And so that's what we're calling for. I mean, this is part and parcel also of the ending militarization, even in our communities in the U.S., ending it in the Western Hemisphere. And as we see things taking place, the occupation of Haiti right now, our people in Haiti are standing up and they're trying to act like, they're really using the United Nations so-called peacekeepers and U.S. Forces to pretend as if they're trying to do something that's along the lines of justice or helping the people, when it's in fact the complete opposite. These forces are committing serious atrocities, human rights violations against the people, raping women and doing all kind of things, and killing people in the streets. These are the so-called peacekeepers in the United Nations peacekeepers. So anyway, that's in a nutshell. We're trying to bring back the radical Black tradition into this peace movement, bringing into this peace movement that calls for ending imperialism in all its forms, particularly militarization.
And Amanuel, any last thoughts you want to share with us? What you any wishes that you have when it comes to the U.S. and its allies out of Africa, and in term, for Ethiopia and its neighbors to have everlasting peace within itself and within one another.
If I'm to segue what Mr. Netfa said, is the United States is a very, very powerful nation, and its power is the brilliance of the people. And the people have to be informed to understand what is going on around the world. The United States could outcompete China. The Europeans could because they already had incredible influence around the world. The American culture, the Western culture, is pervasive throughout Africa. The sentiment of the African people, the affinity that they have for the United States and for the American people, is great, and they could actually translate that into partnerships, economic development, cooperation, educational exchange program, cultural exchange programs, with bilateral relations with nations. In other words, act as part of the global community to bring Africa to a new era, rather than trying to subjugate the people and keep them in a sustained life of poverty, so they can exploit the resources. And so if we can partner to exploit the resources, the United States could do a lot to help Africa and the United States itself. Technology, they could, create new markets, employment opportunities for Americans, just create the global community that we all aspire to see. The United States has the capacity to do that. They just have to angle their thought process into doing good, rather than just trying to dominate Africa using all kinds of nefarious methods. So I second what the Alliance for Peace is doing, and I wish there are more groups that are working towards that kind of movement, and at least educate the American people so they can start looking at themselves as part of the global community, rather than just Americans, and just think about America first and ignore what the United States is doing everywhere else around the world. Take responsibility and ownership of what the United States is doing, and play a part into changing the U.S. ways, so we can coexist in a decent way of living. So I think that is a message that we need to keep pushing, and hopefully that resonates. It's kind of like a wishful thinking that's not going to happen.
Well,
the United States didn't get great cooperating.
We're looking for more people like Mr. Netfa and you.
Thank you. Because one thing for Black people, I think, and particularly Black people of African descent in the U.S., we should see the U.S. policies in Africa as being an insult to us. The fact that that's our motherland. We come from Africa. If you can't, you certainly can. How they treat Africa mirrors how Black people are treated in the United States. There's the militarization of our communities here through the 1033 program that gives military, and so we have to have a connection. We have to see it, as related, and the fact that we have to forge connections and stand up against what happens in Africa, because it's directly tied to what happens to us in the United States or any place else where the United States has influence.
If I may add to that note, which is very, very important. What has happened in Africa after the Cold War, after 1991, is probably one of the grotesque human rights violations that happened in the Congo, Rwanda, Somalia, South Sudan, and you can go to Ivory Coast. Everywhere in Africa, the Holocaust that really took place in that area during the Clinton administration and Obama administration, the Bush administrations, is something that needs to be uncovered, talked about, because we had human calamities that are not talked about, untold.
That's right.
It is incredible, and we need to have these discussions over and over again to talk about the extent of the disaster, the millions and millions of Africans that are being killed, that were killed. So it's very, very important to talk about that, because when you talk about
Black Lives Matter. That is what it is. It's global. It's not in one area. It's global. So we have to talk about it in a much larger context.
Well, this will be the first of many conversations, I hope, about that. And yeah, and I completely agree with what both of you said, that we can't talk about Black Lives Matter and demilitarizing the police, defunding the police, working to have community control over the police, without also speaking out against the global policemen of the world, the global stop and friskers of the world, which is the U.S. military and its allies. And when we talk about environmental apartheid, when we talk about fighting climate change, it's our people which are the frontline victims of climate change, and trying to demilitarize the U.S. and its allies will help us in the fight of climate change, as the U.S. is the biggest is the biggest polluter in the world. So
yeah, polluter and militarizer or whatever. Well, thank you.
So on that note, we were joined by Netfa Freeman of the Black Alliance for Peace, also a radio show host, and we were joined by Amanuel Biedemariam. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for joining me, and I look forward to having you both back on in the future, because yes, we also do need to talk about what's going on in Congo, which is interconnected with Rwanda, Uganda, Burundi, as well as Africa in general, which unfortunately is too overlooked, even on the left-leaning press. So thank you both so much for joining me on this special Black History Month, U.S. out of Africa, and I look forward to having you both back on in the future.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Likewise.